Well, hello again from Sunland Park. I just made the flight over to Ely, Nevada earlier today, and it was very uneventful. You can trust me, uneventful is good in the air. If you've ever had the option to fly 5 miles and crash into the mountains, or fly 5 miles and crash into the sea, or get stranded in the jungle, then you know that uneventful is good. I want to spend a few minutes debunking the conservative myth. If you listen to conservative talk radio or Fox Noise or read a lot of their columns in periodical publications, the consistent message you get from conservatives in the United States is that low taxes, deregulation, and cutting spending are the keys to prosperity. And that has been the dominant political philosophy in the United States since about 1980. There are only about 4 years that it wasn't the dominant philosophy overall. Those were the first 2 years of the Bill Clinton administration, when there was a Democratic control of all branches of government, and then the first 2 years of the Barack Obama administration, when there was Democratic control of all branches. But other than that, low taxes and cutting spending has been the dominant political philosophy in the United States. And they consistently preach this message, and it hasn't worked very well, has it? If you listen to conservative talk radio or you watch Fox Noise, you're going to hear this pseudo-history that Ronald Reagan came to office in 1980 and cut taxes and cut spending, and the economy just caught fire after that, and everything was the big rock candy mountain, and therefore the key to prosperity and everything that we do in the United States is to have low taxes, low spending, and deregulation. Well, what really happened during the Reagan years? He was elected in 1980 and promised to fix America. There had been some economic problems. There had been a mild recession, nothing compared to what was coming. And his solution to all the problems in America was, as I said, cut taxes, cut spending, try to achieve a balanced budget, and deregulate. So he initiated something called Reaganomics. And Reaganomics was embodied in two key pieces of legislation that were passed in 1981. The first one, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981, slowed the growth of federal spending. It didn't actually cut spending, although that's what he was advocating, but it slowed the growth of federal spending. And some priorities were changed with regard to federal spending. And I'd like to tell you just a couple of the negative effects that came from that. Is there any doubt that we have a lot of nutcases running around in the United States whose elevators don't quite go all the way to the top, and they're involved in these massacres that occur in places like Newtown, Orlando, San Bernardino, Baton Rouge, and so forth? Any doubt that we got a lot of nutcases running around? Well, there was a shift in spending priorities in the 1980s that involved closing mental institutions and putting people out on the street, so that the dominant treatment paradigm became medication and counseling and people running around out in public. And so now you got screwballs all over the United States doing all kinds of crazy things. And that was sort of the genesis of that, putting mentally ill people out on the street in the communities. And every time there's a mass shooting, the Republicans, the conservatives, start talking about mental health, and they don't do a damn thing about it because they're not going to spend the money to reverse those policies. Another thing was student financial aid for college. You still have Pell Grants and supplemental grants and things like that, but the emphasis shifted to student loans so that people could go into debt and stay in debt forever in order to get a college education, and get so deeply in debt that they could never get out of debt. Never, ever, ever. That was just a great idea, wasn't it? Hopefully it won't cause Great Depression 2. Or would it be Great Depression 3? Possibly. Because that last downturn in 2007, 2008 was more like a depression than a recession. So there was that budget cutting bill, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981. Then the famous Reagan tax cuts, the one that supposedly ignited all this prosperity and enshrined low taxes forever and ever, that was embodied in something called the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. And taxes were slashed. Tax rates were reduced. There were a tremendous tax cut. And if you listen to conservative orthodoxy today, they'll tell you that that's what's necessary for prosperity. What happened after those tax cuts, the Economic Recovery Tax Act, was the worst recession since the 1930s. 1982 was a terrible year. And those tax cuts were enacted in 1981, and the economy literally went to the seventh circle of Hades. But something else happened in the middle of that recession. In summer of 1982, Congress passed and President Ronald Reagan signed the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982. And you won't hear a lot about this because it's something that conservatives would rather forget. But this TEFRA, Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982, was the largest tax increase in history up to that point. And they didn't erase the previous tax cuts, they just raised different kinds of taxes. So they didn't reverse the previous policies. What they were doing basically was robbing Peter to pay me, more or less. And after this huge tax increase that conservatives really don't want you to know about, but it's a matter of history, you can look it up, the economic recovery began in about January of 1983 after unemployment peaking at around 10% or so. So it's not true at all that tax cuts suddenly spurred this great burst of economic activity. That didn't happen until after the tax increases, until after the TEFRA law, which was passed in the middle of the worst recession since the Depression at that time, in the middle of 1982. And the recovery started in January of 1983. And you know what? It was a slow recovery because national unemployment didn't dip below 6% until September of 1987. So it was a long, slow recovery. And I've got news for you. Taxes went up 7 times during the Reagan administration. You might want to look up something called the Greenspan Commission. So what actually happened during those years preceding that recovery actually contradicts conservative philosophy. And this information is out there, but there are very powerful interests who don't want you to know it. You can look this up. It's out there, but the history has largely been buried by conservative apologists. So it didn't happen exactly as those people have said. Then you come along to 2001, and the Bush administration enacted the largest tax cuts in history up to that time, about $1 trillion. So then the economy lips along for the next several years, producing a lot of low-wage, unstable jobs. And it was also an atmosphere of low regulation where businesses were allowed to do about whatever they wanted to do. And then the economy crashes in 2008, and those tax cuts didn't protect the U.S. economy. So what does this mean? Have conservatives been lying all along? Absolutely they have. Absolutely they have. The whole thing is a scam. Conservatism is the biggest scam ever perpetrated on the American people. And this information is out there if people would only bother to look into it. But most people won't do that. And you can check into this for yourself. Now, what does that mean for 2016? It doesn't mean a lot now. There were opportunities to fix a lot of this, but it was kind of, to put it bluntly, pissed away in the nomination for the Democratic Party. But the history of economics that you get from conservative politicians, it's largely a pseudo-history. It's largely deception. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. There are a lot of people out there who've been involved in deception for a long time, and they have fooled most people, unfortunately. So those are the facts. That's what really happened during the Reagan years and afterward, and you can check this out for yourself. Of course, how do conservatives respond when challenged? Well, a lot of them don't even know this. When you're talking about conservative-leaning people, you're not talking about the brightest bulbs in the room. A lot of them don't even know that taxes went up 7 times during the Reagan years. They don't know about TEFRA. They don't know about the Greenspan Commission. If they do know about it, they'll run around the mulberry bush. They'll quote anecdotal evidence. They will cherry pick data favorable to their position. They'll do anything that they have to do to get you believing that tax cuts and deregulation and keeping government out of everything are the keys to the Big Rock Candy Mountain. They are not. Economically, things haven't been that good in the United States for quite a while. And as I said, this whole idea of conservatism, this domination of the idea that you keep government out of everything, that you have tax cuts for the wealthy, that you deregulate, that's supposed to be the key to fixing everything. The evidence is in, and it's been in for a long time. That simply doesn't work. And everything I've told you can be documented. But you have these organizations who sort of pose as research organizations. I think of the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and some of those organizations who feed information to conservative talk radio hosts and Fox Noise and others. And I would say of those organizations, they are not legitimate research organizations at all. They are advocacy organizations. And the reason they exist is to promote their point of view. And conservatism does benefit a certain class of people. It benefits the 1%. Like, you know, if you want to be a totally unscrupulous, greedy, self-centered, son of a bitch businessman, you can get along pretty well with conservatism, because conservatives are going to allow you to do pretty much whatever you want to do. And that means low wages. It means no paid maternity leave. It means employment at will. It means moving jobs out of the country any damn time you want to do it. Moving corporate headquarters out of the country, dodging taxes, getting involved in risky financial schemes, irresponsible loans like happened in 2000, the early 2000s, subprime mortgages and all that, just totally unregulated to the extent that they need to be doing whatever they want to do. And, you know, when you let business interests do what they want to do, they do it, don't they? And then everybody else ends up paying for it. So conservatism, this nonsense, this effluvia that pours forth from a certain television network, from conservative talk radio, from various columnists who write articles in newspapers all over the United States, it's a big lie. It's the biggest scam that's ever been perpetrated on the people of any country, really, because a lot of other countries have they've learned a lesson very well a long time ago, that unrestrained capitalism, yeah, it benefits some people, but it sure as hell hurts a lot of other people. So, if you want to know more about how conservatism basically screwed up the United States, look this stuff up about the Economic Recovery Tax Act and TEFRA and the Greenspan Commission and the results of the Bush tax cuts and all that sort of thing. And you're going to find, as I've told you, that economic conservatism is, in fact, the biggest scam ever perpetrated on the people of the United States. And that's the way that it is. Thank you for your time today.